With SE Connect, you can learn a 15-minute comprehensive manual therapy treatment that will set you apart from other massage therapists. SE Connect is the only multidisciplinary platform with practice tools, business tools, and a community of practitioners speaking the same language. Check it out at network.structuralelements.com. As a massage therapist, you know that truly the world's most beautiful machine is in your hands. You help relieve the pain and pressures that hold your clients back from fully enjoying life. The CBD Clinic Massage Collection uses ingredients from nature to deliver strong, effective temporary pain relief with aromatic botanicals and natural emollients like CBD. Our tiered pain products let you personalize your massage to meet each client's needs. Be your client's hero by giving them the massage treatment of their dreams with CBD Clinic. Learn more at cbdclinic.co. ABMP members get 20% off the list price on all Handspring Publishing titles, including Thai Massage Dissected by Natasha de Grunwald, which explores a diverse modality that's more than stretching and deep tissue work. Visit handspringpublishing.com to learn about these and other books. ABMP members visit abmp.com/discounts to access your discount code and save 20% on all list prices with free shipping to US and UK addresses. Find your next favorite book at handspringpublishing.com.
Welcome to the ABMP podcast. My name is Darren Buford. I'm editor-in-chief of Massage and Bodywork magazine and senior director of communications for ABMP.
And I'm Kristen Coverly, licensed massage therapist and ABMP's director of professional education.
Our guest today is Chris Smith. Chris is a recognized leader in the field of massage therapy and trauma. She is a massage therapist and trauma touch therapist. She developed and has been teaching trauma touch therapy at the Colorado School of Healing Arts and to therapists worldwide since 1992. She has been with Colorado School of Healing Arts since 1988, where she serves as the school director. For more information about trauma touch therapy, visit the school's website at csha.net. Hello, Chris. Hello, Kristen.
Hello, Darren. Hello, Kristen. It's so nice to see you all.
Chris, it is so wonderful to have you here. And we're so grateful to have you here with us today to talk about trauma and trauma touch, because as we know, more than ever, as we begin to understand and process how the COVID pandemic has impacted us emotionally and physically, the ability to recognize and address trauma in clients, but also ourselves, and let's talk about both all throughout this podcast, clients and ourselves. It's so important that we understand how to recognize and work with trauma. So before we go any further, let's start, though, with the general definition. Chris, what is trauma?
Well, trauma is anything that overwhelms our normal coping mechanisms. And oftentimes some of the hallmarks of trauma are that it was unexpected and the person was unprepared. There was nothing that they could do to prevent the event from happening. Very much like the pandemic. Who knew that it was going to be what it was, that it was going to take so long, that it was going to affect us so deeply worldwide. And sadly, none of us can escape traumatic events, whether it's personal or, tangential. It's everywhere.
So, Chris, what's the difference between trauma and stress?
Stress is really kind of a part of everyday life. Although the symptoms can be as severe as those of trauma, they can usually be mitigated or resolved by, just simple lifestyle changes, eating less sugar, getting more sleep, talking to a friend. And also, if you add in the ability to experience social engagement, such as talking with good friends, things can normalize in a relatively reasonable amount of time. But trauma is different, and it creates a complete and very complicated dysregulation in our brains and our nervous systems. And so it fundamentally alters our sense of safety, our ability to make meaning out of our experiences. It activates the autonomic nervous system and puts the individual in a constant and unrelenting state of hyperarousal. It's very difficult, almost impossible, really, to mitigate by lifestyle changes like we would with stress. And common hallmarks of trauma are things like helplessness and isolation and hypervigilance and insomnia. And so, I think it's just much more unrelenting and difficult to shift gears. It really becomes, as I've heard many times said, it becomes an instant habit. All of a sudden, our life completely changes and is turned upside down.
Wow, everything you just said is so powerful. And if we really think, like, the words that struck me and really popped out to me were fundamentally changes who we are and how we feel, that it's constant and unrelenting. Just that word unrelenting really encapsulates how someone who's experiencing trauma, and especially extended trauma, will be feeling, and that it's an instant habit. Instantly, we change who we are and how we move through the world because of this experience or whatever was the trigger for the trauma.
Yeah, it does. It also changes in somebody that's experienced trauma. It changes our baseline of arousal. And that baseline of arousal becomes elevated and doesn't return back to normal. And so, with each new trauma or stress, that baseline continues to elevate, making it easier and easier for the person to become more and more traumatized with less and less stimulation. And so, this is where, people start to feel like, I never feel safe. This always happens to me. And it's just 24/7.
And Chris, it's really hard for someone to heal from trauma, right? Like, a lot of times you hear people say, "Oh, just get over it." Ah, are you still thinking about that thing, that happened a week ago or a month ago? Why is trauma so hard to heal from?
Well, I think, again, we have to recognize the fundamental changes that happen in the brain and in the autonomic nervous system. What happens in the brain is that you have the moment we experience trauma, neuronal connections, maps are formed to basically hardwire us to experience every new event, however normal that event might be, but every event through the lens of our hyperarousal, through the lens of our already, irritated limbic system. And then the thing that's even more challenging is that those neural connections receive more myelin, which is sort of the grease that makes the synapse go faster. And so it just increases the level of hyperarousal. The other thing that I think, though, that we have to look at too, and you sort of referred to that, is, why can't you just get over it? That happened 10 years ago. Why can't you just get over it? Is that a lot of the hallmarks that show up in an individual that's experienced trauma are actually mistaken for that person's personality, and they don't get a chance to come off of that easily. And then there's the shame piece. People are saying, why can't I get over it? Well, why can't I get over it? I must be a flawed human being. It just feels like failure at every turn.
Chris, it sounds like compounding factors, prolonged compounding factors. What are the long-term emotional effects of prolonged trauma?
Well, I think the long-term emotional effects of trauma, would be things like anxiety, depression, panic disorder. The other thing, though, that I think happens, which makes sense when you think about, this level of hyperarousal that happens in the nervous system, is this, again, and I'm going to use the word unrelenting, sense of numbing, and we can numb really well. We can numb out everything. And so we just have a complete inability to sense aliveness and joy, because numbing isn't specific to, I'm just going to numb out the bad things. Numbing happens, overall. So you don't experience anything positive either.
So, Chris, when you mentioned that, it made me think of compartmentalizing. You mentioned numb, and that made me think of people being able to separate feelings into multiple categories and to put it over there, just to put it over there. And I understand that there are going to be triggers or re-triggers that are going to make it resurface, but is compartmentalizing something that people do to get past a traumatic event?
Well, I think there's an attempt to compartmentalize, that they can just put it over there. But because, well, let me go into another thing there, that what happens oftentimes is the prefrontal cortex, which is that part of the brain that kind of goes into executive functioning and so forth. It also is affected by the trauma, and so we usually operate out of that part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, that tells us what has gone before, what's worked, what's not worked, and then we can kind of live our lives, fairly well out of that place. But when it's disrupted by these neuronal maps and disconnects and hijacks and things that happen in the brain, even the ability to compartmentalize doesn't work. I mean, people just get into this place where they just feel so isolated, and it's almost like their body has become the enemy, their brain has become the enemy. How can I isolate to the point where I'm even isolating from myself, and it's not even working? And that's where it becomes really crazy making, on many levels. You don't even trust your own perceptions.
Let's take a short break to hear a word from our sponsors. Anatomy Trains is happy to announce our return to the Dissection Lab in person, January 10th to the 14th, 2022, at the Laboratory of Anatomical Enlightenment in Boulder, Colorado. We are thrilled to be back in the lab with Anatomy Trains author Tom Myers and master dissector Todd Garcia. Join students from around the world and from all types of manual, movement, and fitness professions to explore the real human form, not the images you get from books. This is an exclusive invitation. Email info@anatomytrains.com if you'd like to join us in the lab. Now let's get back to the podcast.
Chris, let's transition and start talking about how this affects the physical being. So how might sadness, grief, and trauma manifest in the body?
You can see generally a lot of tension, pain that seems to have no real origin, shallow breathing, sleeplessness. I think overall, feeling too much or feeling too little is something that happens. But the thing that I think is even more important to understand in terms of how it manifests in the body is that trauma creates basically an inflammatory process. And that can be actually demonstrated by a simple blood test. When people who have experienced trauma, if they perhaps ask their physician to have a blood test that tests C-reactive protein, usually those levels of C-reactive protein in the bloodstream are highly elevated in people that have experienced trauma. So when you have that, again, unrelenting level of inflammation, and we're talking about sometimes people that are experiencing this for 10, 15, 20 years, you can also run into things that really are pretty severe. You can get esophageal spasms, you can get reflux, ulcers, migraine headaches, TMJ, vision problems, colitis, bladder, infections, reproductive issues, colitis, just a whole host of disease processes that, basically come from that high level of inflammation in the body and the bloodstream.
Chris, how can we recognize trauma in a client?
Well, I think what you're going to see is oftentimes a sense of isolation, anxiety, panic, an inability to rest, sleep. They might report that they're having nightmares all the time, changing in their eating patterns, changing in their normal routines. They may get on the massage table and just literally freeze. You may, as a massage therapist, feel just an overall sense of tension in the body. And another thing that I think is very, very important to notice as massage therapists and our clients is to make sure that they're not dissociating when they're on the table. Oftentimes, even well meaning touch can still add more overwhelm to that already irritated and unstable limbic system, and so the client may dissociate, and that means they basically check out. They go away. It's a really amazing coping mechanism, but it's a terminal level of coping where they just go. They're not feeling. They often may be reliving some aspect of their traumatic experience, and so to continue working with a client who's dissociated, it's very, very dangerous because you're usually escalating that traumatic moment for them.
So, Chris, if you recognize that, you say it's dangerous, is the best thing to not have the session or stop the session and then refer out? Or what would you suggest?
I think the most important thing is to stop. But what we often see, and I've seen this in classrooms where the therapist will, hands fly off the client, and I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. What's going on? Are you still there? What are you thinking of right now? Where are you? And those are all the questions that are just going to further deepen that level of dissociation. So the most important thing is to have the client turn over, open their eyes, and you may have to encourage them. Susie, open your eyes. Come on, look at me. There you go. And if they're in the face cradle, have them turn their head, look at me. Come on, here I am. Let's make eye contact. There, here you are, and just make sure that they're back. Now sometimes, clients can go in and out of that dissociative state, and they may say, no, let's go ahead and try a little bit more contact. I think I'm going to be okay. And so what I'll usually do is say, well, let's make an agreement. If you start to feel yourself going, raise your hand, and then we'll know. We'll stop, we'll reconnect, we'll open the eyes, and just go from there. But it's really important to always work with the body in the present moment.
And Chris, let's talk about clients who aren't in that phase. So they're not experiencing disassociation, but they've either been forthcoming with you about trauma they've experienced or you've recognized the physical signs you talked about. How can we as practitioners create a space for them? What are the do's and don'ts of working with clients experiencing trauma?
I think the most important thing to do is don't see them as damaged. Don't see them as broken. Don't call them, I'm going to be working with my trauma client today. Then you put them in a box that they'll never get out of. I think it's important to see every client, regardless of whether they have trauma or not, as fundamentally whole. And you work towards that wholeness. You see a person as a fully realized human being and not their pathology. Carl Rogers had this great concept of bathing people in unconditional positive regard. And people can feel that. It's a tangible quality that you can bring to the relationship. I think the other thing that you have to watch for is don't have an agenda. I've talked to massage therapists who in the they have the right space, they really want to do their best job, but they've researched all this stuff about trauma, and so now they think they're going to have this certain protocol that they have to do, and people don't fall into a protocol. They're all individual, they're all different, and so you have to just show up, be present, be authentic, and just be ready for whatever happens, and be willing to have more of a conversation. I do quite a lengthy intake with my clients before they get on the table.
Chris, that's
Yes.
exactly what I was going to ask you,
Oh,
because trauma isn't a checkbox on an intake form like high blood
it's
pressure.
not.
Can you tell me about that? Like how I know, and somebody is probably obviously not going to be forthcoming about trauma on an intake, right?
So what I have is a little area that says, is there anything I need to know that would make this session more comfortable for you? And because clients, I don't assume that just because a client comes in for massage, they're ready to be touched, right? So I have to, and I certainly don't understand or don't assume that they are going to be trusting me right away. So that trust has to be developed, over time. So that question kind of opens it up to share, for them to share as much as they want to share. I think sometimes we all have that sense that maybe there's something more going on, but I have to keep that to myself and not let that necessarily color how I'm, again, seeing this client. I have to see them as fundamentally whole. And I think if we work towards their wholeness instead of their pathology, the outcome is just 100 times better.
I love that. Work towards their wholeness and not their pathology. I also wonder, as we're talking about whether or not clients might be forthcoming, I wonder if because you are a trauma touch specialist, they do feel more confident and secure in telling you a bit more than they might another practitioner who doesn't list trauma touch as one of their specialties. What do you think about that?
Kind of both. I have clients that I think probably do, feel a bit more comfortable knowing that but I'm hoping it's more coming from how I present myself rather than what my, EIEIO is at the end of my name. But then I think there's also clients who might see that, trauma touch therapy, and this is the other thing that I do, and may be even more cautious about, oh my gosh, if I shift around on the table, or if I just kind of go to sleep, is she thinking I'm going to be dissociated? And then, so it can kind of work both ways.
Chris, if we are working with a client who has experienced trauma, I think most people's instinct would be that when we're thinking about techniques to use with them, it's like, oh my gosh, lighten up, don't do anything deep. What's true? I don't know. That's just what people's minds might go to. But what are some do's and don'ts with the actual techniques that we use?
Thank you so much for asking that question, because here's what you need to do: ask the client. Ask the client rather than assuming, one way or the other. I think rather than negotiating sometimes the depth, it's more about going slow. And it was funny. I was just talking to one of my classes the other day about a client that I had who came in and said, I just need you to help me feel more whole, more integrated. I feel completely fragmented. And I thought, okay, well, what does that look like? And she kind of stopped for a minute and said, I think it means more pauses. And so I said, oh, okay, well, that I definitely can do that. But, how are we going to know, like, are you going to tell me when I need to pause? And we did the thing of, well, how about this? If you need me to pause, raise your hand, because sometimes that ability to vocalize isn't always there. So just raise your hand. And the thing that was really remarkable about that was, one, how many times we paused in that massage. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting is that the pauses were not at all where I thought they were going to be. So again, I'm trained well. I mean, I feel I've been doing this for a long time, and I still, had that little bit of, oh, I think it's going to be here or here. It wasn't anything like I thought it was going to be.
Chris, that's amazing that you and the client had that conversation pre-session. But what about in the session if somebody had a sudden emotional release?
Yeah, the thing that happens is, I think it's really important to see that emotion release is just this wonderfully organic, normal response to touch. And again, we don't want to, take our hands away and start apologizing, thinking that as the therapist we did something wrong. That emotion can be just a wonderful accompaniment to the work that we do, and a normal response to just basic touch. So I think we have to just pause, check in with the client, affirm that, listen, I'm here. What do you need? And oftentimes the client may, and in my experience, say, just keep your hands there. I'm just going to move through this for a moment. Just give me a moment. And it can elevate into sometimes, much more active crying and vocalizing, and maybe some, movement in the body and so forth. And then, what we might do is, see if there's a different position they want to be in. But I don't leave. And even if they ask me to take my hands away, I still continue to affirm, I'm right here. Just let me know what you need.
Simple but powerful.
Yeah.
Simple but
Yeah.
effective.
You want to be careful not to try and engage the client into what was going on and what were you thinking and what were you experiencing, because really that starts to go outside our role as a massage therapist. We're not psychotherapists, and even if we were, that would be happening in a different context. We're massage therapists, so we can do things like, so what's happening in this place where I have my hands right now? What's happening in the body? I think that's really important, to reference back to the body.
Chris, I'm curious, when you're teaching your trauma touch therapy courses, so we're in a classroom with practitioners, what are massage therapist learners most surprised by when they're learning trauma touch?
Oh, I think first of all that the approach is really simple. In fact, the hardest thing I have to do when I'm teaching trauma touch therapy is to help people unlearn what they think they ought to do, and need to do. And so it's simple. It's simple. But I think the other thing that is really surprising to everybody, and often to me too, is just, sometimes humor comes in. We laugh, we get playful. Play is one of the hallmarks of trauma too. That lack of ability to play or be playful is often one of the first things that goes away when we've had trauma. And so to be able to so easily move back into that is very surprising. And I think another thing that I think is part of the work that surprises a lot of people is that they can sit with themselves when nothing is happening. Because if you've been somebody that's had trauma in your history, there's a tendency to keep that arousal level elevated because that's what's comfortable. That's what we're used to. And so if it drops and nothing's happening, then what does that mean? That means that something bad might be happening. Something bad's about to happen. And so they spiral back up into that, hyper arousal. And so to be able to learn how to just sit and nothing's happening and it's okay is just a miraculous sort of moment.
Wow, that's really powerful. Chris, let's bring it on home. If listeners recognize trauma is present in their own lives or bodies, what suggestions do you have for self-care?
It's kind of a challenge, and I'll tell you why. In talking to a lot of people, and myself as well, sometimes self-care can just be one more thing we have to do. And then we get all judgy and competitive about it, Like, I had friends during this pandemic that decided, I've got this time off. I'm going to be the healthiest person during this pandemic ever. And so I'm running 10 miles a day. And then I wake up and I do this 20-minute yoga practice. And I had this wonderful Buddhist teacher that gave me this wonderful practice to do. And it's just so amazing. And I'm thinking, I'm lucky if I get to the kitchen in the morning without tripping over the dog. So it's like, holy smokes. So I think, the thing about self-care is just pause. Ask your body what it needs. Get out in nature. Sometimes when you're in, like, I often go, we have a park near our house, and I go out into the park and I see the clouds and I think, the world is so much bigger than what I'm experiencing right now. And to have that perspective is such good self care. But I also have times when I lay on the floor, I stare out the window, I stop making it a thing. And I think what I've found more helpful for me is to just have moments of pause and quiet throughout my day rather than having this thing that I do that takes an hour or 20 minutes or, is some magnificent whatever. I just take more pause. And I notice that my, nervous system is much happier with that, much more balanced with that. And for me, that's the best kind of self care.
Wow, this has been a very powerful and amazing podcast. I want to thank our guest today, Chris Smith. For more information about trauma touch therapy, visit csha.net. Thanks, Kristen, and thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much, Darren.
Chris, thank you so much for being with us and sharing all of that incredible content and your passion with us today. It's going to help every listener and also everyone they interact with. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. Thank you all, too.
Listeners, when I'm not working on the ABMP podcast, I'm creating CE courses in my role as ABMP's Director of Professional Education. I absolutely love working with instructors and experts in the field to share their knowledge with you through online, on-demand courses in the ABMP Education Center, where members earn free CE for more than 200 video-based courses covering a wide variety of techniques and modalities, ethics, therapist safety, and more. If you're not a member, you can purchase single course access or discounted multi-course packages. Find a new favorite instructor, learn a new technique, and find a course you'll love at abmp.com/CE. Members are loving ABMP 5-Minute Muscles and ABMP Pocket Pathology, two quick reference web apps included with ABMP membership. ABMP 5-Minute Muscles delivers muscle-specific palpation and technique videos, plus origins, insertions, and actions for the 83 muscles most commonly addressed by bodyworkers. ABMP Pocket Pathology, created in conjunction with Ruth Werner, puts key information for nearly 200 common pathologies at your fingertips and provides the knowledge you need to help you make informed treatment decisions. Start learning today. ABMP members log in at abmp.com and look for the links in the featured benefits section of your member homepage. Not a member? Learn about these exciting member benefits at abmp.com/more.